Welcome to the All About You podcast. I am your host Sheila, and today I have part 2 of my conversation with Remi. Remi, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, Sheila, thanks for having me back.
You are very welcome. I do like to have a returning guest. In our last conversation, you were talking about your experience of leaving the USA and moving to Valencia here in Spain. But today we're going to be talking about your process and your journey to early retirement. Where shall we start with that, Remi? Did you have at like 25 the idea you were going to retire at 40 or 50?
I would say I kind of wanted to enjoy life. That process or the advice, I have to give credit to my parents. Find what you're good at early and do what you're good at early.
Love that. They were very, very sound advice from your family.
Right. And most people that understand migrants, my parents are Nigerian, I'm of Nigerian descent. The idea of your child attending the university is pretty selective. So the conversation I remember back then was, what would you like to do, Sheila? And you get to pick from 3 choices: doctor, engineer, or lawyer. That was basically it. And this is very common with families. And then your mom chimes in from the kitchen, but hey, we have too many doctors in the family currently, so now you get 2 choices, engineer or lawyer. I hated reading. I knew that early on, so I loved numbers. So I became an engineer.
That's very interesting, isn't it? Because I think most parents want their children to have more opportunities than they did. I think that's quite common, but I love the way that you had a choice of 3 and then one of those, well actually that's taken. Which one of these left and right are you going to take?
Correct. So with that advice, okay, now you picked, my brother and myself both picked engineers, right? Then it becomes, well, what type of engineer do you want to be? And I vaguely remember at an early age telling my dad, which one of them is the highest paid engineer? And he goes, well, let's research. Came down to, back then, there was something called a genetic engineer, nuclear engineer, and then petroleum engineer. Back then, where those were at the top, 3. So I picked petroleum engineer because the 2 weren't offered in most universities close to me. They were pretty non-common majors. I don't even think anyone knows any person that's a genetic engineer. So fast forward 20-something years later, I had a successful career as a petroleum engineer. You develop several different roles throughout your career, right? You become production engineer, reservoir engineer, drilling engineer, all kinds of stuff. But everyone would also know this within, this is Houston, right? Within the oil and gas industry is one of the better industries to be in, at least 90s and early 2000s, right? This was the industry to be in. That said, you had to really work your tail off to make a name for yourself in this industry. The advice did not end there. The advice went a little more like, okay, after graduation, where do you go? You had 2 options. A lot of my peers went to the big oil. We all know their names, the big, oils. I chose not to do that, despite the fact that with a recent graduate, big oil offered you a decent salary, but did not give you equity. My pops made it known that, hey, not just him, I asked a lot of questions, professors. I've always been a good listener. The easiest path to, I don't want to say achieve success, but the term success is relative, to accumulate wealth is to work for people that gave you an opportunity to have a seat at the table. So the earlier you understood that, the better. So early on, I remember I would take a pay cut, 30% less than what my peers were making, to go work for the small guys. Because the small guys will give you equity in the company.
So when you say equity, it's like you're buying, some of your salary goes in to buy shares in the company, that type of thing?
Close enough.
Okay.
Now, in the oil and gas industry at the time, your compensation package is a few pages long, right? When I say equity, it means the company will give you shares of the company, not buy.
Okay.
You could buy with your money if you want,
Yeah.
but as your salary, assume your salary is X, your bonus structure is Y, your equity play is Z. The equity tends to be worth more than everything else combined. And that motivates us employees to have a skin in the game, right? So we work extra hard, a bit more diligent, we stay extra hours. By contrast, let's assume that big oil has 1,000 engineers named Sheila. Obviously, in the smaller companies, they have 2 engineers named Sheilas. So which means the work of 1,000 is now on the backs of fewer people, which allows you to gain more knowledge quicker, have more responsibility quicker, but you tend to burn out quicker. Because you are doing pretty much everything. From a knowledge standpoint, that makes you more versatile because the Sheila that went to work for Big Oil, you become a subject matter expert on one thing. So, for example, I had a buddy of mine, it was a water disposal engineer. He knew everything about disposing water. But when it comes to other aspects of the industry, he had no idea. But the Sheila that went and worked for a smaller company now understood the entire company. So you could easily do different people's jobs and fill different roles, make you more marketable. So when, this is years later, when the recruiters, headhunters, came looking, they preferred the Sheila that went to work for a smaller company because they understood you knew your stuff.
Yeah, that you're a good all-rounder as opposed to an expert in one particular area.
Exactly. If I could elaborate a little bit with from the American system, right? I'm not familiar with the British system. Within the same organizations, if you worked for most oil companies in the States, right? As part of your compensation package, you have a 401k type contribution.
Right, so 401k is the retirement
it's
fund as
one
such.
of them.
Yes.
There are several, right?
Yeah,
So
you
there's
always hear about
401k,
the 401k,
there's,
yeah.
Roth IRAs, there is regular Roth, which is a traditional Roth, there is the 529B, which is a savings program for your babies.
It's quite complicated, your
There's
tax system.
several options. One that mimics what you just described is an option where you could take part of your salary, tax deferred up to a cap, to invest in a private fund. The beauty of that is if you invest within the parameters of the company matches your contributions. That's very different from equity because that you have control over what to invest in, right? So you could take, at the time I think is X% of your salary, set it aside, and the company would instantaneously match 100%. Some companies match 50%, but that's almost 100% return on your investment from day one, right, on the match. So you have nothing else to lose. So I always advise people, put the max amount that the company is going to match because you're getting 100% return on your money from day one. That's aside. So then you put that. Back then, there used to be a company, Fidelity, I think it's called Fidelity Investment, which is a brokerage firm that managed those investments, right? So you put X amount, the company matches it, and that's for you to keep. Very different from equity. Now, depending on the company you work for or how you came into the company, your equities have a vesting period. So day one, let's assume Sheila gets 100 shares of the company. Same time, next year, you only have about 25% of that 100 shares vested, which is yours, assuming you're in a vesting schedule of 4 years. Some vesting schedules are shorter, some vesting schedules are longer. So at any given time, you always have skin in the game. So if you decide to go to another company, you have to calculate specifically how much unvested equity you have compared to how much you're walking away with.
I mean, what you're saying here, this is quite a lot of number crunching from your point of view, and you've admitted you're a numbers guy, so you probably quite enjoyed
Absolutely.
doing the spreadsheets, working it all out, calculating. Would the average person do that? I mean, obviously the system you're talking about is relevant to the US. We're sitting here in Spain and I'm from the UK, so we've got 3 different perspectives here. Do you think the average person would do all the number crunching you've done and have that viewpoint?
Well, the average person could, but they don't have to, right? Remember, just by listening to good sound advice. Also, in certain industries, you don't actually apply for the jobs. They come looking for you. And when they do, your agent or the headhunter or the recruiter does these numbers for you. Because he or she sometimes are paid by the asking party. Sometimes they are on a retention for talent. So he or she will do this for you because they are familiar with what you're losing.
Yeah, how it all works.
And how it all works, right? So that they present you with the best possible option for you to make a decision on. Additionally to that, this is just one tiny journey to early retirement. There are thousands other options, right? Programs depending on which company, which industry. Before we get to retirement, I think it's also good to define what each individual's definition of retirement is. Now, when I speak retirement, I'm not speaking age, pension, associated retirement, because that's what most people think. Well, you're not old enough. Yeah, obviously I'm not old enough because I am not collecting a government's pension, right? Which is most person's idea of retirement. Now, we'll touch on that and then we'll come back to this journey of mine specific to me as it pertains to my industry. The average economy in the world, the average government agency in the world asks its citizens to work 30, 40, 50 years just for you to collect a pension at 70, 67, whatever the number is, when the average human dies at 72. So, mathematically, you're asking me to give you 40 years of my life and I only get about 2 years of pension in return, if I'm lucky. If I died before my pension, guess what? The government keeps it. Or that seems like a scam to me. It doesn't sound right. And then you look at quality of life. If I'm 72 and I'm collecting my pension, how much quality of life am I going to have? I don't know. I'm sure there are some excellent 72-year-olds out there. Additionally, when you factor in the cost of living over time, most pension programs don't really afford you the lifestyle you had, the equivalent in recent times. So collectively, I said, okay, there's got to be a better option. What is this better option? It's a math problem, yeah? You look around you, you ask yourself, who is my oldest living relative? Again, most people know this math, but I'm going to simplify it. My oldest living relative, you get that person's age. My age, what's the difference? Yeah? Most people are going to get somewhere from 20, 30-year difference. You multiply that difference by how much does it cost me today? What is my carrying cost today, monthly, annualized, times that age difference. Depending on what your lifestyles are, you get a number. So let's assume for basic math, I need 5,000 euros a month to live, which is a good lifestyle. 5,000 euros annualized, that is 60,000 euros. Again, you could check my math. I'm freelancing this, right? So let's assume you are in your 30s or in your 40s and your eldest uncle or dad before you died was 70 something. That gives you about a 20, 25, 30 year span to live. You multiply that by 60,000 euros a year, that gives you about €500,000 plus or minus. I'm saying you technically could retire the day, the second, the minute you could put your hands on €500,000. Fair enough? Which means the day you get €500,000, by numbers, you could spend the same 5,000 every month and not outlast your money. Assuming supplemental incomes don't kick in, assuming every government pension goes broke, assuming no one else gives you money, in theory, you could take that bank and spend it just as you've been for the remainder of your life. In my opinion, that day technically is the day you're not retired, because that means, Sheila, you no longer have to go work for your money. Your money now works for you. You could go anywhere in the world, sit at home if you want to, whatever floats your boat. All I ask is, do not develop new habits that's not in that $5,000 monthly carrying cost. When I mean new habits, if you did not have a Lamborghini before, do not go buy a Lamborghini. If you did not gamble before, don't go start gambling. If you weren't married before, don't change anything, because those affect your numbers. People say, oh, but inflation. Yes, inflation. I understand that. But as humans, your expenses changes over time, and it evens out. And this is what I mean. Younger folks spend money more on enjoyment, parties, drinks, drugs, women, whatever your options are. I'm not here to judge. But as you get older, you can no longer keep up with those things. The average 50-year-old person cannot drink as much as the average 20-year-old person. It's physically impossible. But as you get older, you shift from partying to convenience. You tend to spend money on convenient things, things that you rather not stress about, right? Things like, oh, rather than drive 20 hours, I'll just fly because I just don't want to be bothered with it, right? Rather than, go queue at the Ayuntamiento for some document, I'll just pay someone to figure that out. Rather than buy myself new clothing, you know what? I'll just take my grandkids out shopping. But so if you look at the numbers, it evens out over time. This idea is my definition of retirement. Now, how early can you get to your number? Well, that depends on you, Sheila. Do you have a higher standard of living or a lower standard of living? Right? If your standard of living is high, I used the example, $5,000 a month, which is, depending on who you are, it's mid to high. Could you offset that by changing location? 5,000 goes a long way in Spain compared to, say, Switzerland. If your number is 1,000 a month, it goes a long way in Mexico compared to Spain. If your number is 500 a month, it goes a long way in Guatemala compared to, say, France. It's very possible at different levels. You get to decide what's more important to you. Do you want to survive or thrive?
I think that's a very valid point, isn't it?
And don't forget, some of them might drop dead before they actually get the chance to play the golf. All I'm saying is, why not play a golf now? Same applies to travel. Why wait?
I think in our lives we always have that, when the children leave university, when I retire, when the mortgage is paid off, when. And sometimes that when never actually comes. And I've always thought, get your retirement activities in place well before you retire.
Absolutely.
And I remember many years ago when I was in corporate, there was a lady, she was probably 5 years away from retirement. However, she spent that 5 years cultivating the groups, the interests, the activities, and she got well involved with those in her weekends and her free times, so that when she did actually fully retire, she just, right, I can also go on a Monday morning and do this, as opposed to only a Saturday afternoon. I've never forgotten that, and that was probably a conversation 25 years ago, and I've never forgotten that, Remi.
Yes. Now, there's a movement out there to come back to what we're talking about. How is it possible? I think the movement is called FIRE, right? FIRE. It means financial independence, retire early. I didn't come up with a word, but I read about it. There are several groups that's, on this journey. It's very common if you're focused. How do you achieve your number? the number we just talked about. I'll come back to my specific journey later, but most people in this FIRE movement are normal people. The most common approach is you have a dual income household. You base your expenses on one income, save the heck out of the second income to help you get to your number faster. That's an option. There's options of where, Sheila inherited her number money. Your aunt, your grandpa died and say, hey, Sheila.
We all live in hope of that.
Yeah, it's an option. To each his own.
Yeah, it happens.
I always tell people this. My parents didn't leave us anything. We are self-made. There are those that believe in the lottery. Personally, I don't think I've known any human or a person that's actually won the lottery. So I don't play the lottery, right? I'm a numbers guy, and I know my odds of actually winning. But it's possible. So Sheila plays the lottery tomorrow. She wins her number or the equivalent to her number. Technically, you could take the retirement options, right? And this is becoming more common. Sell all your assets, right? As Americans, you accumulate a lot of assets. You have 3 cars or however many cars per person in the household. You've got the big house, you've got the country house, you've got the estate, you've got the vacation home, you got the my least favorite is called a timeshare. You got a timeshare that's just a drain. A lot of people liquidate everything, come up with a number, and decide, okay, this is our number. So there are different options to get to what your number is. The sooner you have a plan, the quicker you could get to your number. Now back to and I've told this to a lot of people, my individual option was years go by, bought and sold several times. You cash in your equity, you go through the normal blackout period, and then you come back, and then you keep doing it. Now you're a senior in your position, and the conversation goes a little something like, hey Sheila, we need you in another town, city, country, whatever the situation is. But at this point, Sheila is comfortable in this particular town, city, or state. And your chain of command, your bosses really want you to go somewhere else because they need you there. But you're just exhausted, you can't go. But deep down, you are at or near your 100% vesting period. You are at or near the timeline for them to get rid of you. And if they do, they have to pay you to go away. In American terms, they call this a golden parachute. Mm-hmm. So basically, the company says, well, it's cheaper to pay Sheila just to go away. I was fortunate enough to be in one of those scenarios. I was given the offer. I went home, I looked at the numbers, and I said, you know what? I think I will take this. Ends the kickoff to my early retirement.
Before that time, let's go a little bit earlier in your career. When you were growing up and you looked at your parents and their retirement, did you see yourself, okay, I'm going to retire at 60 or whatever it was back in your parents' day? Did you look at your parents in respect of retirement when maybe you were in your 20s, or did you not even think about retirement?
My parents weren't around. They died, right? So they didn't even get their pension. Did I consider that as a motivating factor? Not sure. If I'm being honest with you, not sure. But I knew that I wanted to do certain things before I died. Right. And one of those things is travel the world. Well, God darn it, I can't do that if I am busy with deadlines and project after project after project, because I am focused on that. Not less the parents, yeah? So the parents' idea and the motivation that came before you left the nest. Once you left the nest, you're on your own. Not on your own, but your decisions are yours, right? Again, you can always reach out to people that have tried it, done it, or are familiar with what you're trying to do. What I would always advise is be a good listener. The best advice always came from unexpected places. Understand the math. The math has to make sense to you. Like I said, I've never really liked reading, and being a lawyer wasn't, those guys read a lot. But I understood numbers. That brings you to everything that you do towards retirement to be more numbers, less emotional. One could argue, well, that's a bit robotic. To an extent, yeah, because in order for you to understand numbers, again, this is my opinion, you have to see numbers for what they are, not a 2 plus some emotion equals 5. No, a 2 and a 2 can never equal 5, right? It's always 4, regardless of what language it's in, regardless of what location it's in, regardless of what time of day it is. A 2 and a 2 is always 4. Once I start adding sentiments and emotions to it, well, this 2 is a little bit prettier, this 2 is older, then you get yourself in trouble. Am I making any sense, Sheila?
You're doing okay.
Now, was I fortunate to also have been in the system, the US? I think the UK and the US share similarities, which is your ability to earn more than the rest of the world. The average person in Spain and in the UK or in the US, the person in Spain would make less. And that's just the way it is. So understanding that, coming full circle back to our discussion in episode 1, if you could move into a economy or a country or a region where your earnings comes outside of that region, you're better off than trying to then move to that region and try to look for work. Everyone in Spain will tell you, do not come to Spain looking for work. There's no jobs here. And if there are jobs here and you're able to find it, the salary offer would borderline insult you.
Yeah, and they're very strict now, as in the first option is a Spanish person has to fill that job. If they really cannot get a Spanish person with the requirement, then they will offer it to somebody else. And that's been a big change for people coming from the UK. Now that after Brexit we're out the EU, that has made a huge difference, particularly for people sort of teaching. That's been a big problem.
Yes, it's not easy. Every decision you make has its pros and cons. Like I said earlier, I love to travel. That means it becomes a bit challenging to build relationships, right? Because one day you're here, the next day you're not. And that goes for, meeting people all over the world. Back to, again, I keep bouncing back and forth because the concept or the idea of retiring early, the FIRE movement, more than likely we might have to do a part 3 or part 2 of the financial independence route, because I reckon that in itself, equally if not more important than the destination or the arrival in Spain or how it works. Because once you understand the financial independence, you also have to understand the tax and the implications of moving to another country, especially as Americans or British nationals or all non-Spanish nationals.
A lot has changed, and I think as well it's appropriate to mention that we've got a lot of people who are literally sitting in their flats in Spain, working from countries all around the world, earning the salaries associated with those countries, but enjoying the cost of living in Spain. Having had conversations with people from lots of different countries, including Spain, there's a lot of resentment there, because Spanish people, they're earning what we would consider quite a low salary, because that's the way it is for a majority of the jobs. And all they can see is hordes of people coming from other places, sitting in these, co-working spaces, working on whatever, but earning the UK salary, the Dutch salary, the American salary, etc. So I can understand their frustration with that, definitely. I think it's only right to mention that.
Absolutely. And just so that we're clear, these people you speak of are not retired. They are working remotely. I think the Spanish government refers to them as nomad tourism, where you're a nomad, but a digital nomad. There you go.
You
That's
can be
the word.
Anywhere. Yeah.
Right. Now remember, someone that's paying your salary still owns your time. Right? So either you're teaching English online, or you are working remotely, or you're a digital nomad. Someone somewhere in the world still commands your time. That is not financial independence. You're enjoying the best of both worlds. You get to, do what you love, but in a country that favors you. Great. That can change at any given moment. Slightly different than no one commands your time. You get to wake up when you want, go to bed when you want, do as you please, without the need to ask permission or vacation or accrue vacation. That is true freedom, right? As we are speaking today, my next deadline is where I want it to be. As a matter of fact, when we're done here, I wore my flip-flops today because I'm going to walk to the beach and put my feet in the warm sea.
Mediterranean Sea.
There you go. That's the word. Because I felt like it. And tomorrow, what am I doing tomorrow? I have no idea. Tomorrow's Saturday. I might go hiking, depending on the weather, but that's the idea. And Sunday, I think there's a soccer match Sunday that I want to watch.
Oh, we're in the middle, lots of football, yeah.
Yeah, so this is freedom. If you're fortunate enough to be able to plan and execute said freedom, that's great. Because I get asked the question of, oh, okay, now that you're retired, are you just sleeping all day? You get that a lot. Like, well, what exactly do you do with your time? Do you just die, or do you just, get fat? And I think what you do after retirement, that should be another full episode, because people tend to forget. Accumulating wealth, that's almost the easy part. Holding on to it is actually more difficult than accumulating it. And when I say holding on to it, the world, the systems of the world, is designed to separate Sheila from your wealth. The taxation is always going to go up, it's not going to go down, right? We live in a country, in a region where they'll love to tax people. We could make a whole another segment on the reason taxation in Spain, justifiable, is high, is because the Spanish government, again, I'm not here to be for or against any government agencies, but generally speaking, a government that gives so much to its people takes a lot in return. It's just the way the numbers are. If you look at the population density, the unemployment rate in Spain is incredibly high. That means not enough young folks are paying into the system. The population is relatively older. I believe Japan is the other older population.
Yeah, basically the funnel has inverted, hasn't it? We've got more people who require pensions at the top than we've got youngsters earning the money at the bottom. It's gone the other way round now, definitely. So I think in most countries that is the situation.
So
now.
the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
Two things, again, goes back to my idea for you to retire early. Even if you don't listen to me, just understand with this inverted funnel you speak of, most government agencies might not be able to pay pensions. Some of us will not receive a pension.
Exactly, and I think that's it. It's going to affect us at the top end because we're living longer, which is a good thing because of health, etc., etc. And a lot of people cannot afford to have families or large families because of the cost of living. It's being squeezed in all directions, and I personally think the UK pension will stop at 70, and then you've got to make your own provision. Absolutely, I think that's what's going to happen.
So if that's not a good enough motivation for people to start thinking now, what is?
And the way I look at it as well, as much as we can think about retiring early and what that looks for you, as in how you're going to spend each day, as you say, you're going to still be in your pyjamas at lunchtime watching daytime TV, or are you going to be spending $20,000 a year on your golf? What does retirement look for you on a day-to-day basis? And I mean on a rainy, wet November Monday, not just in the lovely summer months when you're out picnicking all over the place. What does that look like for you on a day-to-day, and how much is that going to cost you? But if we look at the young people now, they're leaving with university debt. They're trying to get themselves on the housing market. They're having problems with the mortgage. Two people trying to get on the housing market, maybe they want to start a family, she's going to have to give up work, or one of them will give up work to look after children because childcare is just a nightmare in the UK. It's a lot of balls to have up in the air and to keep them juggling.
One or two of those balls must drop.
Yes.
It's the way the world is.
Yes.
You touched on several topics there. Not sure we're going to go into all of them. One of them is this idea that you have to own a home. It's almost one of those myths. It's not always a good idea for anyone to think they have to own a home. Now, coming from someone that owned several homes, I've bought and sold houses, I've built houses, I understand both ends. I did a detailed explanation in one of the groups. The question was, in Spain, should you buy or rent? Yeah, and I went in because this is something I'm very familiar with. Logic and number driven. It's not personal. Likewise, your first question of what do you do after you retire? I think my recommendation is post-retirement. It is incumbent on the said person, couple, family that's retiring to spend at least 20 to 30% of your time counting your money. I call it counting your money because the math has to math. If the math isn't mathing, excuse my English here, then there's nothing worse than you having to retire and go back to work. At least in the US, you see the 60-somethings, the 70-something-year-olds coming back into the workforce or trying to come back into the workforce, competing with those younger folks. I almost feel bad for them. We had a program back in the States where supermarkets like Walmart would hire senior citizens to bag groceries or to do things that are just, and you could see them struggling, right? Because when you're 70, the movements are restricted. A big chunk of counting your money, you should devote a lot of time to that. When I mean counting your money, I don't mean physically, go in your bedroom and count every single pounds or euros or dollars you have. No. When you retire, the easiest way to go broke is not knowing your numbers. Recently in Spain was Declaration de la Renta, where you file taxes. Yeah. Most people forget, again, the system is designed to separate Sheila from her funds. That's how the system makes money. So they are very good at coming up with new ways of separating you from your funds. If you forget to do this, there's a penalty for that. If you make too much money, there's a penalty for that. If you don't make enough money, there's always different stages of your life that someone, something, some government agency wants to take from you. Not to mention family members that want to take from you. Not to mention the scams out there that want to take from you. Not to mention all the different things that you're supposed to spend money on under the wrong circumstance could make you go broke. One of those things, just one tiny of those things, is this idea of home ownership. You buy the home, and then Brexit happens. What do you do with the home? Now, overnight, you didn't sign up for Brexit. It was not your idea, but now you have a home in Spain and you're a foreigner in Spain. What do you do? So, fire sale. Are you going to ever make money on that sale?
And a fire sale is basically getting rid of something as quick as you can at nowhere near its true value, literally. Yeah, and a lot of people have been in that situation.
Remember, the system is designed to take from you.
I think particularly in the UK, we have really got this concept of an Englishman's home is his castle. We are very much about buying a home, whether it's a house, a flat, whatever, it's like owning property. However, in Europe, and when I first came to live in Spain, talking to other people from other European countries, that's really not the case. They like the flexibility of moving, or if there's a job change, yeah, we can do this, or schools. It's very much, and you are not looked down on at all. You say, no, I rent. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, fine. Whereas in England, oh, you're renting, obviously because you can't afford a mortgage or you can't. We really do have that attitude in the UK. Whether it's changing now, I've been out in the UK a long time, but when I first came here, it was very much you own a property in the UK, and here and most of Europe you rent. So that's...
Let's touch on that just a little bit, right? Every scam, I hate using that word scam, has its root cause, right? The UK market and the US market are similar in this ideology of home ownership. Again, full disclosure, I've been on both ends. I've bought, built, sold, I've rented flats. I'm on both ends. When I said the real estate scam, we need to understand how banks work, right? Banks, one of the largest products they sell to consumers, not business to business, but business to consumers, is a mortgage. What are the products offers you guaranteed payment for the next 30, 40 years? A mortgage. So over years, just like you must have an education, you must go to the university at all cost. Americans tend to think you must own a home. You're almost looked down on as a peasant if you don't own a home. What this creates is it funds the big engine that keeps the markets going, but it gives people false ideas if they don't understand their math properly. Particularly in Europe, where the cost of getting into debt is less than, say, the UK or in the US, when I mean mortgage rates to get a mortgage. Now, by the numbers, most places in the world have a threshold of price per square meters or price per square foot of what a property should cost, any property. When you find yourself on the wrong side of that threshold, I can guarantee you would never make money. It's a lose situation, with the exception of not everyone buys a home for purposes other than a lifestyle purchase. I'm Sheila. I live in Spain. I live in Portugal. I live anywhere in Europe or anywhere in the world. I have the resources. I don't care about investment. I don't care about capital gains. I don't care about appreciation. I just want to buy a house in Spain. Go right ahead. That is a lifestyle purchase. Very different than if Sheila expects to rent it for income, to sell it at some day, or to give it to her children. That is a bad idea, because we're familiar with Spain. Day one, you buy a house. You are upside down, depending on your closing costs, anywhere from 15 to 25%. The average is about 17%. 10 to 12% in taxes, 3 to 5% in commission. These are paid up front, by the way. Let's just assume the house is $100,000. Day one, you are in the hole, roughly $125,000. It takes the average house to appreciate 1% a year. So you need another 25 years just to get back.
Just to recoup back your initial fees, etc.
Assuming everything was perfect for the next 25 years.
Yeah.
You add 25 years to my age, I could care less about this house. Not to include all the upkeeps, not to include all the taxes annually that you have to. Oh, my favorite. It's a burden. It's one less thing you have to worry about. All of us that have houses all over the world, you're always thinking about it. House in Houston. You can't take it with you. So you're in Spain, you're always thinking about that house. Better yet, you have a rental in the house. Additional problems. I've rented houses to people. I dread anytime one of my renters messages me. It's never good news. It's like going to the mechanic or a doctor. When you get that message, it's always like, oh, another thing I gotta spend money on. And one thing I hope your audience, myself, and others start moving forward, being honest with ourselves by the numbers. And too often I talk to landlords, people that move. They're not always clear on the true cost of being a landlord. They just look at, oh, they pay X amount in rent and my mortgage is X amount. Oh, so it looks like I'm making X amount. But in theory, you're not. You have to factor in a lot of other things into that equation that they would not have factored into. Yeah, the professionals do make money. I remember there was a time where I gave my properties to a professional management company. And then being the numbers guy, I looked at the numbers. The company took 30% for answering all the phone calls and, the reserve, which is what you put in the property in case something goes wrong. At the end of the day, I was losing money. It made absolutely no sense.
Yeah,
everybody else made money but me. You come to markets in Europe, what you then realize is the rental income is not sufficient to offset the mortgage, which is the strangest thing ever. Because, again, this is general rule of thumb, the value of the house should be able to command a rental income of 1% of the value of that house per month. So, for instance, if I buy a house in Valencia for $100K, in theory, in order for me to make money, I need to be able to rent it for $1,000 a month. Then what you find in Valencia or in most European cities is, whatever the value of the property is, the rental aspect of it is so low that oftentimes than none, the owner have to bring money from savings just to pay for the mortgage. If you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you get an occupa problem that won't pay you. Guess what? You have to continue to pay for every service, light, electricity, and the mortgage out of your personal savings without even enjoying your own house.
I think in this conversation, Remi, we have covered an awful lot.
I know.
I personally would say the two takeaways from this conversation is, number one, what is your idea of retirement? As in, how do you plan to spend your days? And I'm not just talking about the breezy, hazy days of summer. I'm talking about the wet Monday in November as well. And how do you spend your money? What is your lifestyle? What are you prepared to say, well, actually, when I retire, I won't be buying as many bottles of really nice wine. I'll have to get used to supermarket wine, or I might not be able to buy a new wardrobe every season. I think if people can look at those two things and be 100% honest, because if you're not, the only person who's going to suffer is you. Be completely honest with yourself.
Absolutely.
And that might not be particularly a nice thing to do.
It's never a nice thing to do.
Because I think in retirement we've all got this wonderful idea that you're going to do all these crafts and hobbies and travel and all these wonderful things. A majority of those cost money, and the more you get into it, you might want to buy special equipment, etc., etc. It's been absolutely fascinating what you have said. What does retirement look like for you? And get out that pen and paper and draw out how you plan to spend your days, and be 100% honest with what your retirement lifestyle would look like and what is important to you, is as in how you spend your money.
Absolutely. And remove the emotional sentiments that you have. Again, I remind your audience, a 2 and a 2 is always a 4. No matter where in the world you are, no matter what language it's in, a 2 and a 2, always 4.
I think that's going to be the title of the podcast, Remi. Remi, thank you so much. I mean, you've given us so much information today. We've talked about what happens in the States, what we've learned in Europe since living here, and the UK. A brilliant, brilliant conversation. Remi, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. And please subscribe for future episodes. It is free. And if you have a story to tell, please contact me on allaboutyoupodcast@yahoo.com and let's tell your story.